I think many people will be scratching their heads today and in the next number of months, asking how come we have a supposedly giveaway, bonanza budget, and yet the vast majority of ordinary people are going to be worse off next year. More people will be cold, more people will be hungry, more people will be in energy poverty. And don't take it from me, take it from Cliff Taylor, writing in the Irish Times, I quote, "Living standards will fall, on average, by about 3% this year and 2% next year." And the answer is that it's because the crises that we face are systemic crises. The crisis of cost of living, the housing crisis, the climate and biodiversity crises. They're systemic crises rooted in profiteering and a capitalist system which is based around organising our economy to maximise that profiteering. The profiteering of the fossil fuel corporations without regard to our planet or our people's needs. The profiteering of the energy and food companies in this country. The profiteering of the big landlords and the developer. Their interests and their profits are taking priority. And the centrepieces of this government's budget continue in exactly the same vein. They don't challenge that profiteering in the slightest, instead they continue with it. With the electricity credit, for example, and the temporary business energy support scheme, without price controls, without nationalisation of the energy sector, you are just creating a vast flow of public money through the hands of people into the pockets of energy companies.
That's right.
No mechanism whatsoever to stop the electricity companies pocketing the credits by increasing their prices. No windfall taxes. No, you'll wait for the European Commission to do that. No new energy infrastructure, no investment, no guarantee in controlling our supplies and prices into the future. The exact same thing with the renters' credit. A 7 days credit for those who get it, excluding huge numbers of renters. Everybody in receipt of HAP, despite the fact that they're making top-ups. All students, all low-pay workers who don't earn enough to benefit from it. And those who aren't even registered, the tenancy is not registered with the RTB. But again, even for those who benefit, without proper rent controls that bring rent down to an affordable level, it just ends up in the pockets of the big corporate landlords. It just goes into the pile of money, the €1 billion a year of HAP and RAS and the other schemes that the big corporate landlords benefit from. Same applies to the Help to Buy scheme. From its inception, in reality, it's a Help to Profit scheme for developers. The money just passes through people's hands before ending up in the pockets of the developers. There's a lot of talk these days, because of what's happening in the UK, about trickle-down economics. But the Irish government operates a kind of perverse version of that, a sort of flood-up economics, where the money is temporarily transferred to ordinary people, but with no choice but to hand that money back over to big corporations and with no restrictions whatsoever on their profiteering. This is the significant indirect corporate welfare contained in this budget. On top of that is the direct corporate welfare of the temporary business energy support scheme, €1.25 billion. We support supports going to small businesses, but it has to be done on the basis of proven need and with conditions in terms of quality employment for the workers. Instead, we have a massive giveaway to almost every business in the state. The very biggest corporations in this country are going to be able to benefit from this scheme to the tune of €10,000 of public money every month that the scheme operates. Even more scandalously, there appears to be, and I open to correction here, I'd like to be corrected, but there appears to be no mechanisms to stop the data centres benefiting from this scheme. So is it accurate that we're going to be given €10,000 to each of these data centres a month to subsidise their energy when they're contributing to an absolute crisis of energy in this country? If that's the case, that is absolutely scandalous. Of course, the SARP continues for the high-income people, super high-income people, the knowledge development box continuing the corporate tax haven. And you contrast the billions for big businesses with the pennies for pensioners, for carers and for unemployed people. They needed €27 a week just to keep their incomes steady in real terms. Instead, they got €12. To add insult to injury, they got €2 a week extra for a qualified child. €2 to feed and clothe a child in the context of the soaring prices. Absolutely scandalous. And the sting in the tail of these increases is because of the government's failure to raise the income levels for social housing, or even better, make social housing universal. People will be kicked off the housing lists. They'll lose their access to HAP. The government won't deal with the issue of social housing. It's a huge issue that the government should address. Then last night, the government rammed through a vote to put €5 billion in the rainy day fund. Ministers, it's 3 years since the government declared a national climate emergency. It's 4 years since the then government declared housing to be a national emergency. It is pouring now. We're in an emergency situation. So instead of putting this money away to bail out banks in the future, we should be investing now in public housing, in expanded public transport, in insulation, in retrofitting and in green energy. I also want to raise a point about IVF, because many couples with the leaks will have had their hopes raised that IVF was going to be offered on the public system in 2023. But when you look at the small print, it seems that that is a cruel, inaccurate leak. Minister McGrath, for example, speaks about providing supports for the first time in relation to access to IVF treatment. When you read the budget book, there is not a cent allocated to provide IVF treatment. The Irish Independent reports that the first phase of public funding for IVF treatment will not begin until late next year on a limited basis at first, and details have yet to be worked out on how it will be assessed. Very, very cruel if the government doesn't act now to actually have IVF within the public system, because on this matter couples can't delay. They can't afford to wait for you to get your nice headlines year after year after year, but without actually providing the funding and the resources within the public health system to provide IVF for everybody who needs them. Yesterday, Minister O'Brien also brought a memo to Cabinet about the issue of defective apartments, and he announced, big drum roll, a group to look into the report of another group. We don't need another month, multiple months of waiting to have another report about a first report. We know what the issue is: defective building as a result of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael inadequate regulation and a regime of self-certification. We know what the answer is: 100% redress with the state pursuing the builders responsible. And so this should have been included in the budget yesterday. We provided it in our alternative budget. The government should move immediately and not draw this out. What's the alternative to all of this? If you start from a position not of maximising profit for corporations, but instead from the eco-socialist perspective of people's needs, including the need of all of us to live in a habitable planet, you end up with a very different approach to the budget and a very different way of organising our economy and our society. You would stop the energy rip-off by renationalising the energy sector, by imposing price controls and by running it under democratic public ownership on a not-for-profit basis. You would invest public money instead of handing it over to developers and corporate landlords. Invest public money to build quality public housing. You would buy up the HAP and the RAS landlords, you would buy their properties, and you would nationalise the big corporate landlords. You would take everybody in this country, it can be done, everybody in this country out of poverty. Instead of cutting the budget for climate, for which is what's been done in this budget, you would have massive public investment in renewable energy, including public ownership. You would have public investment in free, green, frequent public transport, public investment in retrofitting and in insulation. You would cut inflation in the simplest way possible, by removing things from the market, from decommodifying things, by providing vital public services as that, universal basic public services, free childcare, free GP care, genuinely free education at all levels. There's the money to do it. In our alternative budget we set with just 4 measures: employers' PRSI, another rate of tax for those over 100,000, a wealth tax, and increasing corporation tax. You can raise 11 billion and the corporation tax comes on top of that. You refuse to do it. The third richest country in the world with social crises all over the place, because you run society and the economy in the interest of the corporate landlords, in the interest of the energy companies, in the interest of the developers. And that's why we need government change, but more than that, we need system change. We need to organise society on an eco-socialist basis on the interests of people, not profit.